My name is Lisa. I am 27 years old. I live in a small apartment with my boyfriend, Pete. He is 30 years old. We have been together for 3 years. Our life is simple. We wake up, go to work, come home, cook, eat, and sleep. I work in an office. I earn more money than Pete. Not a lot more, but still more. Maybe around 15,000 more each year. I never thought that was a problem. Pete also has a job. He always pays his part of the rent on time. I trusted him. We share many things, but we do not share a bank account. We never did. We split our bills half and half. Last week, something changed. We were sitting on the couch at night. Pete looked serious. He said, "We should talk about our future." I thought maybe he would talk about marriage. I felt happy. I said, "Yes, of course." Pete said, "If we want a future, we need to be fully open. No secrets." I said, "Okay, we can talk about everything." Pete said, "Lisa, I want your bank login." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. Who asks that? I looked at Pete and waited for him to smile. Pete did not smile. He was serious. I stopped laughing. I said, "Wait, you are serious?" Pete nodded. He said, "Yes, Lisa. I want to see everything in real time." I felt confused. I said, "Why?" Pete said, "Because couples who are serious don't hide money. No secrets. That's how adults do it." I said, "I am not hiding anything. I just don't think you need my password." Pete looked at me with cold eyes. He said, "If you have nothing to hide, then why not?" I felt hurt. I said, "I trust you, but this is different. This is my personal account." Pete said, "I wouldn't touch your money, Lisa. I just want to see it." I said, "It feels like no privacy." Pete said, "Privacy in a relationship? That sounds strange." I felt confused again. Was I thinking wrong? I did not want to fight. So I said, "We can make a shared plan. We can open a joint account for rent and bills. We can both put money there." I felt hopeful when I said that, but Pete shook his head. He said, "That's not the same. That's just you keeping a wall." I said, "A wall? I'm not building a wall. I'm just keeping something private." Pete looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "If you trust me enough to sleep next to me every night, you should trust me with a password." That sentence felt wrong. I looked at him and said, "That is not the same thing. Trust does not mean giving everything." Pete said, "You are making this too complicated." I felt very tired. I said, "You do not have my passwords, and I do not have yours. That is normal." Pete said, "You can have mine any time." But I did not want his passwords. I never asked for them. I said, "Why now, Pete? Why do you suddenly need this?" Pete said, "I do not want to find out later that you have debts, or that you are sending money to someone or buying things you should not." I felt shocked. I said, What? I do not do that. I never did that. I have student loans. That is it. My credit is fine. I do not hide anything." He said, "I just want to see it myself." I felt sad. Why does he not trust me? That night I could not sleep. Pete was next to me in bed. He turned his back to me. He did not say goodnight. He did not touch my hand like he always did. In the morning, Pete came out of the bedroom. I said, "Morning." He said, "Morning." No smile. Just one word. Nothing more. I tried again. I said, Pete, we can talk about this again, but I still feel the same. Pete did not look at me. He said, It's okay, Lisa. You already made your choice. You know, it must be nice to have a private life. My heart hurt. I said nothing. That day at work, I could not focus. I kept asking myself, maybe I did not understand relationships. Maybe he was right. After work, I went home. Pete was sitting on the couch looking at his phone. I said, Hi. He said, Hey, just one word. I went to the kitchen. I began to cook. Pete came into the kitchen. He said, I found a solution. I said, What? He said, A budgeting app. We can link our accounts. It shows everything in one place. I froze. I already knew what he wanted. I shook my head. I said, Pete, no, it is the same thing. It still gives access to everything. His face changed. I saw the anger now. Pete said, It is not access. It is just viewing, just information. I crossed my arms. I said, I do not want that. Pete said, You do not want anything. Every idea I give, you say no. You are controlling this. You decide what I can see and what I cannot see. His words did not make sense to me. I said, I am controlling. It is my account. Pete said, And I am your partner. We stood there looking at each other. I said, I am not saying we cannot talk about money. I am just saying I need some space, some privacy. Pete turned away and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there alone. The next few days felt heavy. Pete did not shout, but his silence was sharp. One day, I came home with groceries. He looked at the bag and said, Must be nice to buy whatever you want. I froze. I said, What do you mean? Pete said, Nothing. It is your money, your private money. Again, that word, private. I thought about giving him what he wanted just to bring peace back. I imagined giving him my password. I imagined him checking my account, asking questions. What is this? Why did you buy this? Who did you send money to? No, I do not want that. I looked at him and said, Pete, we need to talk. He said, Okay. I said, I feel bad, very bad. This situation is hurting me. If you trust me, you do not need to watch everything. He said, You do not understand, Lisa. I just do not want surprises. I said, What kind of surprises? Pete said, Bad ones, debt, secrets, things that can destroy everything later. I said, I do not have those things. Pete said, But I do not know that. My heart broke. I said, You know me, Pete. You have been with me for 3 years. He said nothing. It was not about bank account anymore. It was about trust. I said, Pete, if I never give you my password, what will happen? Pete looked at me with cold eyes. He said, Then maybe we are not ready for the future. My heart stopped. I looked at him, but I did not recognize him anymore. He felt like a stranger. That night, Pete went to bed early. I stayed in the living room alone. I said to myself, What am I doing? I loved him. I really did. He made me feel safe. But now I felt judged. I felt like I had to prove myself every day. That was not love. That was control. The next morning, I made a decision. I looked at Pete and said, I understand you are scared of problems in the future, but what you are asking is too much for me. It makes me feel small. I do not want to feel like that in my own home. I offered other ways. I said we can plan together, we can share information, but I will not give you my password. Pete said, "So that is your final answer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then I do not know how we move forward." I said, "I think I know. I think we want different things. You want full control. You want to see everything, but I want trust. And if we cannot give each other what we need, then maybe we are not right for each other." Pete stood up slowly. He said, "So that's it?" I said, "I think yes." Pete shook his head and walked away. I did not want this, but I had to choose myself. The next few days were hard. We talked about moving out. We divided our things. We kept it calm. No shouting, no fight, just quiet sadness. When he left, the apartment felt empty, but I felt free. Not happy, not yet, but free. I said, "I will be okay." Trust is not about control. Real trust gives space. If someone asks you to give up your peace to prove your love, that is not love. Choose respect. Choose boundaries. Choose yourself. If you liked this story, please like, comment, share, and subscribe.